Iwo Jima, the flag that rose from ashes. Date: February 19th, March the 26th, 1945. Location: Iwo Jima Island, off the coast of Japan. Combatants: United States Marine Corps versus Imperial Japanese Army. Outcome: American victory, but at a devastating cost. This was not merely the invasion of a small volcanic island. It was the collision of one nation's momentum with another's unshakable resolve. A story etched in courage, fear, and sacrifice, all unfolding in a single battle. For the United States, Iwo Jima was a strategic stepping stone on the path to the Japanese mainland. But this step forward on the map came at the price of thousands of shattered lives. When American troops set foot on the island's black sands, they were met with silence. But it was the silence before the storm. Beneath their feet lay a deadly labyrinth, miles of tunnels, bunkers, and traps, engineered for annihilation. The Japanese defenders had buried themselves into the island, sworn to fight to the last man, with no intention of retreat. Weeks of relentless bombardment had barely touched them, because the enemy was underground, and every inch of ground had to be taken through fire and blood. This battle was not won by bullets alone. It was a test of will, and in the end, the flag raised atop Mount Suribachi came to symbolize more than a military triumph. It stood for the unbreakable spirit of a nation. Yet beneath that symbol lay the blood, mud, and silence of thousands of fallen young men. Iwo Jima became the place where they fell silent, but where history would never stop speaking their names. Preparation phase. The American strategy: Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island covered in black sand, floating in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. And yet, this tiny patch of land would carry the weight of turning the tide in the Pacific War. Strategic objective. The United States sought an emergency landing and operational base for its B-29 Superfortress bombers, conducting air raids on the Japanese mainland. Iwo Jima, located just 750 miles from Tokyo, lay directly on the path to Japan. It was no longer just a dot on the map. It was the key to unlocking the gateway to the Japanese homeland. Task force and military units. To seize the island, the U.S. launched one of the largest amphibious operations in its military history. The assault force was composed of the 3rd Marine Division, under the command of Major General Graves B. Erskine, the 4th Marine Division, commanded by Major General Clifton B. Cates, the 5th Marine Division, led by Major General Keller E. Rocky. These 3 divisions were unified under the 5th Amphibious Corps, led by Lieutenant General Harry Schmidt. In total, approximately 70,000 American troops, supported by air, land, and naval elements, were mobilized and ready for battle. Additionally, the Seabees, the U.S. Navy's construction battalions, were tasked with building airstrips immediately upon landing. Logistics and operational planning. The island was to be subjected to a 72-day-long pre-invasion bombardment by air and sea, one of the longest sustained bombardments of the Second World War. Its goal was to break Japanese defenses and destroy fortifications. But the Japanese weren't on the surface. They were waiting below ground, hidden in an underground labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers. After securing the beaches, the swift construction of airfields was a top priority to establish aerial dominance. Over 450 warships were assembled for the operation. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, landing craft, and various support vessels. Preparation phase. Japanese strategy. Before the American fleet darkened the skies, the ground beneath Iwo Jima had already been transformed into a vast subterranean fortress, a hornet's nest of tunnels, traps, and death. Beneath every stone on this small volcanic island lay a hidden ambush. This time, Japan would not meet its enemy on the beach. It would bury them in the heart of the island. Defense doctrine. The man in charge, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. Kuribayashi rejected the traditional Japanese tactic of defending the shoreline. Instead, he engineered a defense system that turned the interior of the island into a fortress beneath the earth. There would be no trenches above ground. The war would be fought underground. Kuribayashi's plan was not to repel the Americans at the beach, but to draw them inland and bleed them dry in brutal close-quarters combat. Forces. The island was garrisoned by the 109th Division, comprising approximately 21,000 Japanese troops. Every soldier had sworn an oath to fight to the death. To them, surrender was not an option. It was a disgrace. The layered defenses included over 1,500 interconnected artillery and machine gun bunkers carved into the terrain, reinforced concrete pillboxes, hidden strongpoints, and sniper nests. A vast network of underground tunnels and trenches stretching nearly 18 kilometers across the island. These tunnels blanketed the island like a spider's web. Japanese troops could move from position to position, sometimes without surfacing for days. Logistics and resistance doctrine. Japan lacked the ability to resupply the garrison. Iwo Jima was essentially a forgotten outpost, but with a mission that had never been forgotten. Resist to the death. Kuribayashi's orders were explicit. Each Japanese soldier must take at least 10 Americans with him before falling. The objective was not survival, but to delay the enemy and exact the highest possible cost in blood. Inside those tunnels, each soldier had a single duty. One last bullet, one last breath, one last stand. The battle unfolds. February 1945, morning of February 19th, 1945. In the sky, a steel armada. Across the sea, a wall of metal. The United States Navy approached a small island in the heart of the Pacific, its shores lined with black volcanic sand. Iwo Jima. Some 30,000 U.S. Marines began disembarking from landing crafts. But what met them was not a hail of gunfire. The beaches were silent, like the hush before a storm. In those early hours, the Americans mistook that silence for a successful pre-invasion bombardment. But the truth was far more sinister. General Kuribayashi had not placed his men on the beach. He had buried them beneath it, like a ticking trap set to spring. As the Marines advanced across the soft volcanic sand, hell erupted. Machine guns from the dunes unleashed a torrent of death. Surprise assaults surged from hidden tunnels. Snipers targeted and eliminated senior officers with chilling precision. Concealed artillery emplacements turned the shoreline into a ring of fire. American forces found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see, because Kuribayashi's intent was clear. Don't waste your soldiers. Let the enemy bleed himself dry. Strategic outcomes. On the first day alone, the U.S. suffered far heavier losses than expected. The landing beach quickly became a graveyard. Every 10 meters held another ambush, another death trap. Radios crackled with desperate calls of fire, but replies were often delayed or never came at all. For American soldiers, one truth became painfully clear. This island was not an unbreakable fortress, but every inch of it would be paid for in blood. The battle unfolds. March 1945. Victory was immortalized in a photograph, but the war was still dying. By the start of March, the southern portion of Iwo Jima had fallen under American control, but the true hell awaited in the north. As U.S. forces advanced toward the northern tip of the island, Japanese resistance grew more ferocious. And this stretch of land soon earned a name, the meat grinder, because this region had become a slaughterhouse that devoured soldiers. Every trench, every pillbox, was paid for with dozens of American lives. Kuribayashi's tunnel network remained fully operational. Japanese troops emerged from underground at night to launch deadly ambushes only to vanish by dawn, like ghosts of the volcanic earth. Then came February 23, 1945. A small group of Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi, exhausted, dehydrated, and on the brink of collapse. Yet 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman raised the American flag. And in that moment, through the lens of photographer Joe Rosenthal, a single frame was captured. A photograph that would become one of the most iconic images in the history of war. But the battle was far from over. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were still entrenched across the island. Night raids continued through March, launched from the darkness of Kuribayashi's tunnels. U.S. forces advanced yard by yard, clearing caves, bunkers, and trenches in brutal close-quarters combat. On March 26, 1945, the last pockets of resistance were finally silenced. The toll of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were captured alive. The United States suffered 6,800 killed and over 20,000 wounded. Every hill taken, every tunnel cleared, was bought with staggering sacrifice. Thus, Iwo Jima became more than a name on a map. It became one of America's costliest victories, and a symbol of how far the human will can endure in the face of unrelenting war. Casualties and statistical assessment. Victory was won, but the soil of the island carried not just the flag, but the blood of thousands. For the Americans, Iwo Jima was less a tactical triumph than a human catastrophe. They had won, but at such a cost. The echoes of that victory would resonate for years. U.S. casualties. 6,800 American soldiers were killed. Over 20,000 were wounded. It was the highest number of casualties the U.S. suffered in a single operation in the Pacific Theater. Every hill, every bunker was seized tooth and nail, paid for with hundreds of lives. Iwo Jima pushed the limits of battlefield medical evacuation systems and field hospitals to their breaking point. And for many soldiers, even after the war ended, they never truly left the island, physically or mentally. Japanese casualties. 21,000 Japanese soldiers were killed. Only 216 were captured alive, a number that starkly reflects the severity of the no-surrender orders. Surrender was not an option. Every Japanese soldier had sworn to fight to the last bullet. There was no civilian population. Every person on the island was a combatant. Kuribayashi's strategy was executed until the very last breath of the last soldier. In total, this small island cost the lives or bodies of over 50,000 people. But it wasn't just numbers. It was the shattering of a nation's psyche, the power of a single photograph, and the human cost of war that etched Iwo Jima into the unerasable pages of history. Impact on the world. At Iwo Jima, it wasn't just an island that was seized. It was the cracking of an era's heart, the beginning of an unbroken chain of decisions, strategic outcomes. Iwo Jima was the keystone at the heart of the Pacific War map. And now, that stone was in American hands. The United States had crossed the final major threshold toward Japan. The island became a vital emergency landing site for B-29 bombers. After the battle, over 80% of air raids on Japan were supported by runways built on this tiny piece of land. It was more than a tactical gain. It became the springboard that sealed Japan's fate. Psychological effects. For American commanders, Iwo Jima was a small dot on the map, but a moral giant in their conscience. For the first time, the American public asked, how many lives does it take to raise a flag? Japan's doctrine of no surrender cast a dark shadow over the upcoming battles of Okinawa and the Japanese mainland. One of the strongest justifications behind the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was born from the blood-soaked final bullet fired on this island. Because Iwo Jima had revealed one brutal truth: the Japanese would fight until their last breath, and there would be no other way. Human cost. In the wake of victory, the island fell silent. But it was not the silence of peace. It was a requiem rising from the ashes. Iwo Jima was no longer just a runway. It had become a cemetery. Tunnels were packed with corpses. Burnt bodies still littered the beaches. The volcanic soil was too hard to dig graves. Many were left unburied. Mass suicides among Japanese soldiers were common. Surrender was shame. Death was honor. What remained? A mound of scorched earth, an endless silence, and a blood-stained flag. Iwo Jima. A tiny dot on the map, yet it carved a monumental scar into the heart of history. It wasn't just soldiers who fought there. Ideals, shaped by belief and bound by resolve, clashed until their final breath. The ground was not soaked in gunpowder alone, but in sacrifice, in fear, in courage. And that flag, raised atop Mount Suribachi, meeting the wind, was etched not only into the memory of a nation, but into the conscience of all humanity. Because Iwo Jima is not the name of a victory. It is the name of a truth paid in full.